final session of the day, which is Can American Democracy Survive? And I should say before we start that the chances are very good in the next 30 minutes that the verdict on the Chauvin trial in Minneapolis will be revealed. And if people want to talk about it in the chat, or at least tell us what it is, because I don't have a TV on, please feel free, and Michael and I can certainly take up the topic. So let me introduce Michael Tomasky. Michael Tomasky is the editor of Democracy, a journal of ideas. He started yesterday as the editor of the New Republic. He is the author of several books, including most recently, If We Can Keep It, How the Republic Collapsed and How It Might Be Saved. Michael, welcome to the Health and Wealth of America.
Thanks, Jim. I'm thrilled to be here. It's a real pleasure. And if you see me, I do have a TV, and if you see me looking that way, that's what I'm looking.
Well, then we can get it. We can get it straight from you. I want to start with January 6th. And the reason is one of the things that's so interesting about your book is its treatment of the topic of political polarization, right? So, it's very easy for people of a certain age to think that the degree of polarization that exists in America today is a recent phenomenon. And your book makes it really super clear that it's anything but, that it's been part of who America is pretty much from the very beginning. But taking that as a given, I don't think when you were writing this book, you thought of a scenario like January 6th. And so I'd like to hear from you, historically speaking, where do you put this on the crazy meter, on the polarization meter, and how did you take it in as it was going on?
Yeah, well, I sure did not anticipate anything like that, and I was, as shocked and dumbfounded as anyone else. On the crazy meter, it's 1860, 1859, which is not a very comforting thing to say, but it feels like we have reached now, and my book is probably horribly out of date at this point, even though it only came out in 2019. But I think things have changed so dramatically just in those last couple of years, and just in this past presidential election. I think that we're now at a point where we have, one of our two parties is an anti-democracy party. I think it's pretty clear. If they've forced to choose between power and democracy, Republicans would choose power. And even at our worst points, except for the cusp of the Civil War, I don't think that was ever the case. I think that, even let's say the party of Newt Gingrich in the 1990s would have stopped at certain points and would not have done certain things. Or in the early days of the Republic, which I start by discussing in the book, and the country was deeply divided then between Hamiltonians, the elitist city slickers, and Jeffersonians, the yeoman farmers, deeply split. But there was a certain, when push came to shove at certain crisis moments, there was a certain fundamental agreement that they had to keep the Republic intact, which they did through various amendments that changed the way things were done and so forth, and changing Senate rules, which is another thing we're looking at today. So yeah, we're at a dangerous point, and Donald Trump is gone, and he's out of our brains, and it seems to have abated a bit, but you and I don't know what those January 6th plotters are doing today.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably something.
Yeah, I guess that's my next question, which is, to your point, Trump is gone. We have, a new Congress and a new White House, new president, but those forces have not gone away. I was driving through rural Pennsylvania not too long ago, and tons of Trump signs and Trump flags still on lawns. This is very much a reality for a lot of people. And I'm wondering if in your historical examination, you have any, prescriptive ideas for how to deal with this very large subculture, right? Which, not only is kind of totemically tied to a false belief, but has shown itself quite prone to violence. What what can we do? What have more unifying voices done in the past to try to head off something like that? Or is it just inevitable that it goes to civil war as it did in the 19th century?
Yeah, I want to stop short of saying that it's inevitable, because, well, for one
Thanks.
thing, yeah, it's not as regionally based as it was. So it's not as
Yeah.
simple as the North versus the South. Pennsylvania is the North, but Pennsylvania is famously quasi-Confederate in certain rural areas, and then Birmingham, Alabama is kind of a progressive city if you're just in the city. So it's much more complicated than it was in 1860. But I don't know, Jim. I'm really worried about it. Um, we are at a point where the Constitution's been on my mind a lot lately, and we're at a point where it's very clear that our Constitution, which we were all raised to revere and all that stuff, is doesn't work. It doesn't produce majoritarian outcomes, and in many ways, it wasn't intended to produce majoritarian outcomes. But it wasn't also, I don't believe, from what I've read of their deliberations and their ideas, it wasn't intended to be abused the way it's being abused today, by Mitch McConnell, by Senate minorities, and on the question of Senate minorities, I mean, there's absolutely no question that the founders didn't want a supermajority to have to decide to agree to pass every piece of legislation. So, we are, we are in a place that was brought about by, the Constitution and by one party's willingness to subvert the norms that normally provided a kind of civic glue that has melted away.
Yeah. I mean, you frame it from a constitutional standpoint, from a political science standpoint. I wonder how we think about it as journalists, or how we should think about it as journalists. If you just take it as a given that there's this huge number of people out there in the audience who simply, it seems, can't be persuaded by facts. We who were raised in a generation of thinking that journalism was based on facts are sort of at a disadvantage, if not a complete loss. And in what you produce, which is great in-depth commentary on the issues of our day, in both your day jobs.
Yeah.
How do you think about that in terms of persuading people? Or do you simply think, which would be a perfectly reasonable position, like, we're never going to reach those people, forget it? I mean, I know you personally, and I know that that attitude doesn't come naturally to you, but it could be where you've ended up. How do you speak to that audience in this age of kind of bubble media?
Yeah, it's a source of genuine sadness in my life. And I think in the lives of many political journalists. And I used to write in the 90s, in the aughts, trying to persuade, like, the Iraq War, which I
Right.
was against. I wrote to moderate people who supported the war in most of my columns, and trying to explain to them why this was probably not a great idea. So I had that person specifically in mind. And I guess I've kind of dropped that a little bit, and it upsets me. I guess I write more now when I write columns. I guess I write more for history, in a sense,
Right.
for like the future historian who, through whatever bad luck, happens across my scribblings, and he might say, well, Tomasky got this right. So I write for that. And I write for people who agree.
Yeah.
And it's hard to write for people who disagree. My Facebook page, Jim, is an interesting amalgam of my sort of two lives. I grew up in a smallish town in West Virginia, and then I left for the big city and all that business. And so my two worlds meet on my Facebook page.
Right.
Some old friends who I played baseball with, who I went drinking with in high school, perfectly nice folks, and and I still like them. on some level. But man,
Yeah.
wow, the
Yeah.
politics.
I've had a
And,
very similar
and it's
experience with
just,
Facebook.
yeah. And I had to adjudicate this whole thing in last October and like get people to tone it down. And yeah, it's just talking way past each other.
Yeah, it is. It is very sad. Um, I'll take you up on the West Virginia gambit here. The senator from West Virginia finds himself very much in the spotlight these days, which I think you think he rather enjoys, or at least likes to flex the muscle that's been made available to him as a whatever we call them now, moderate Democrat. Talk a little bit about him, as well as what issues he might be persuaded to vote on, and what issues are kind of off the table for him, because he's really the fulcrum of the Senate right now,
Yeah.
in a way that no Democrat has been recently.
Yeah. But let me first talk a little bit about the state,
Yeah.
because I think people might be interested to know this if they don't. When I was growing up there, it was a very Democratic state. You wouldn't say liberal in the sense that Berkeley is liberal, but very Democratic, very, very heavy union presence. And actually
And
surprisingly,
class conscious liberal,
yeah,
right? Because of
class
the coal
conscious
mines.
liberal. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Rooseveltian, liberalism. Um, and it was pretty hard for a Republican to get elected statewide. That began to change when, through a couple of things, vast decrease in UMW membership, because coal could be mined. What the tonnage that it used to require 100 men to mine can now be mined by 6 using these huge machines. So much smaller union presence. The Southern Baptist Convention made huge inroads into the state in the 1970s and 1980s, really changed the cultural politics of the place. And then it started to become an issue around the 2000 election. I would say was a turning point. Democrats normally won West Virginia. Even Mike Dukakis won West Virginia.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd forgotten that.
Yeah, but Gore lost it, and he lost it because he was seen as Mr. Tree Hugger and all that. And ever since, it's been tough for Democrats on a national level. Now, in the last 10 years, it has completely flipped on a state level. That is to say, the state legislature was still Democratic, as is often the case in these kinds of situations.
Right.
But in 2014, 2016, and 2018, the state legislature just flipped violently to the Republican side, and it's very heavily Republican now. No state in the country has flipped as dramatically from Democratic to Republican as West Virginia. And just earlier this year, voter enrollment statistics came out showing more Republicans than Democrats for the first time, probably since the 1920s. So that gives you some context for thinking about the calculations that Joe Manchin has to make. I mean, I'm not necessarily defending the guy, but Trump won the state by 39 points. Imagine if there were a Republican senator from Vermont, which Joe Biden won by 45 points, and imagine the pirouettes that person would have to make. I think Biden will be for, or Manchin will be for infrastructure, because that'll help the state. He seems to be for the PRO Act, the Labor Act, which he came out for the other day, which is a good thing. And I think the president of the United Mine Workers, Cecil Roberts, saying yesterday, I believe it was, that we understand that a post-coal economy is coming, and we just want our people to be retrained, and we want to build solar panels here in West Virginia. That could be a big moment, and that could produce some psychic and cultural changes in the state. I worry about Manchin most on the voting rights thing, which to me is the most important thing of all. I mean, they're all important, but that's the one. And I worry about him a little bit on that, because there's not a massive Black population in the state, and it doesn't affect him personally in the same way it would affect people from other states with more demographically mixed population.
Yeah. And we know where he stands on a $15 an hour minimum wage.
Right.
I think you pointed out that he did fight to preserve Obamacare, which is not nothing.
Right.
When we talk about these sort of fence sitters. Well, let's move to voting rights. I think a lot of people in this audience watched with a lot of anxiety what happened in Georgia when they passed these restrictive voting laws, which some people are comparing to Jim Crow. I'm not sure if that comparison is maybe a little inflammatory, or maybe it's right on. Do you think that law and its copycats in other states are going to be a wave that we have to deal with now for the next couple of years? Do you think they'll have successful constitutional challenges? And what do you make of the arguably strange bedfellows opposition between kind of civil rights activists and big corporations who are doing things like moving the All-Star game out of the state?
Yeah, that All-Star thing it's kind of complicated, right? I mean, Stacey Abrams said she didn't want them to move it, so there people were all over on that one. But yeah, I mean, I think Republicans have figured out that there's a very simple truth here. If you go down the major issues of the day, economic issues, domestic policy issues like healthcare, immigration, what the minimum wage should be, et cetera, guns, certainly, 60, 70, 75, and in the case of background checks, 80 or 85% of the people support the Democratic position.
Right.
The Republicans know this. They can read polls. So they know that taking the positions they currently take, they can't win an honest majoritarian election. I mean, they can in Wyoming and Oklahoma, obviously, but on a national level and to the extent of winning 218 seats in the House of Representatives, they can't win that on the basis of their positions. So they have to win it in a different way. They have to win it by, riling up white working class people about cultural issues. And they have to win it by suppressing
cheating.
Yeah, by cheating. Yeah, and they're all but open about it in certain ways. I mean, the way they're behaving and the laws these states are passing. Texas is another horrible one that just got through, and there'll be more. And then the Supreme Court is going to gut what's left of the Voting Rights Act, presumably. And the one that I really fear that may be coming someday with this Supreme Court is that they get rid of the one person, one vote standard. Now, people may not know the history of this, but one person, one vote was established as precedent and law in the early 1960s after a tremendous, awful battle. People asked Earl Warren, what was the most contentious issue that was decided on your court? And he said, without question, one person, one vote. Now, they decided a lot of contentious things.
Yeah, that's pretty stiff competition.
Yeah. He said, without question, one person, one vote. One of the associate justices had a nervous breakdown during the deliberations.
Wow.
That's what a big deal this was. And if this court could overturn one person, one vote. And if it does, they can do whatever. They can draw any kind of legislatures they want. They can legally draw a state legislature where, urban districts have 80,000 constituents and rural districts have 20,000 constituents. And just stack the deck in that way. Did I get that right, or did I get it backwards? I think I got it right.
I think you got it right. Yeah. That's a frightening prospect. There's a great question here from the audience. Michael at factor.com says, what are your thoughts about ways to alter the nominally constitutional playing field, such as reforming the Supreme Court, the Electoral College, the Senate, voting rights, which all have become instruments of anti-democratic forces?
Yeah, well, it's hard work and the work of many years and of raising public awareness about these things. But it's got to go on. The filibuster can be done away with tomorrow if they want. So that's one thing that would make
talk a little bit about the filibuster, because you wrote a piece recently in the New York Review of Books on this, and I think there's some history there that's not widely understood.
Yeah, well, I reviewed a book that I recommend to people who are interested in this by a man named Adam Gentleson called Kill Switch. And he goes into the whole history of it. The long and short of it is that the filibuster was invented by Southern racists to preserve racism. That's John Calhoun. That's really what it was. It wasn't there at the founding. Then in 1806, Aaron Burr changed a rule that made it kind of possible, but it didn't really start until the 1840s, and it was Calhoun, and it was over slavery. And then, they tried to change the rule in the late 1800s so that the Southerners couldn't do that anymore. They got sandbagged and fell one vote short. Then in the 20th century, Richard Russell and the other Southern segregationists did the same thing. That's all it was really for. They finally broke it in 1964 for the Civil Rights Act. And once they broke it, well, that was a great thing, obviously, but then in a weird sort of way, it like lost its power as this talismanic thing. Oh, the filibuster. So that's when slowly but surely they started just kind of filibustering everything.
Right.
And now a filibuster, of course, doesn't involve going down to the floor and
It's like the threat of filibuster.
Yeah, right.
They don't even have to do it anymore. You just have to say,
right.
closer.
And
Yeah.
an aide literally calls the cloakroom and says, "My boss is going to, not agree to unanimous consent on that bill."
It's like moving the intentional walk in baseball to just like, okay, you're walked.
Yeah,
you don't have to throw the ball
yes,
anymore.
Right. Yeah.
It sounds to me like Jimmy Stewart has a lot to answer for on this, but without wanting to pull you completely into punditry, let's talk 2022. It's traditional, if not quite axiomatic, that the party in power will lose votes, lose seats in the midterm elections. Certainly, Biden looks very popular out of the gate. The policies are extremely popular. Is that enough? Does that really matter anymore? How are you looking at the 2022 elections for the House, and what are the key Senate races people should be watching?
Yeah, well, let's see. We return again to the Constitution and these structural issues because Republicans control enough state legislatures, and they're going to draw new district lines as soon as the census numbers are delivered this fall. And so, Texas, for example, is going to gain 3 seats, I think. The Latino population of Texas has exploded. Are those 3 new seats, or at least 2 of them, going to be Latino? One somehow doubts it, right? And in Georgia, the legislature is going to be gunning to destroy the seat of this woman, Lucy McBath, who first won in 2018. And there are a lot of examples like that if you look around the country. The Democratic majority in the House, of course, is very slim. Is it 10 or 11 seats or 9 even? I can't remember, but they can take care of that margin just through gerrymandering.
Yeah.
Without even having to actually pick up a seat. So it's tough. And the prospect of Kevin McCarthy being speaker is other than comforting. I guess the key Senate races are, Ron Johnson in Wisconsin. I don't yet know who's running against him, but he'd be a good one to take out. There's going to be an open seat in Pennsylvania, which seems possibly gettable. There's going to be an open seat in Ohio, which is tough, but it looks like it's going to be Tim Ryan, the congressman from Youngstown, who maybe has the profile to win a statewide Ohio race. He's like Sherrod Brown, except that he played football instead of went to Yale. So I don't know. Those are some of the Senate races to watch. On the positive story from the Biden Democratic perspective is the one that goes, as I'm sure people watching know, that if he passes these things and pumps all this money into the economy, Keynesianism works. This is another thing Republicans know. They're not stupid. They know that it works. That's why it terrifies them. So
or they do it through the Pentagon. I mean,
yeah, right. Yeah, they don't mind military Keynesianism, but the economy will get a boost. And if we have GDP of 5.5 or 6% in early 2022, who knows? That could salvage things for Democrats. I mean, the average loss, as you said, is 26 or 27 seats. But there have been times when the incumbent party held on. And the last one was 2002, and it was because of 9/11 and the war on terror and all that. Now we ask ourselves, is this as unique a situation as that? Well, maybe it is. You know, we're coming
Yeah.
out of a pandemic where the death toll is going to be 700 something thousand. So maybe it is that unique.
Yeah.
It's not entirely hopeless, I don't think.
Um, we're coming up to 5 o'clock. I would be
Yeah,
remiss
still
if
no
I,
verdict, by the way. Yeah.
okay, thank you for that. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about your fancy new job.
Yeah.
You started yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, as the
Yesterday.
editor of the New Republic, and you know it's a publication that certainly I have followed, you know, pretty closely for many decades. Lots of people have. It's positioned itself differently at different times over the years. What do you plan to do with it?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a great honor, and you and I both read it going back to the 1980s, probably.
Absolutely.
Um, uh, I plan to do with it what I've done with my journalism for the last few years, basically, really. I mean, I think the job of a liberal political journalist in this country at this time is the same, whether you're editing the New Republic or editing Democracy Journal or writing columns for the Daily Beast. I mean, the first job is to call out these neo-fascists and point out what they're doing to this country and expose them. And then the other job is to demand of Biden and the Democrats boldness and real approaches that really change the economic paradigm that has reigned in this country for the last 4 decades, that has produced this inequality and this stagnation and this opioid crisis in these desiccated small towns, and bring real hope to people again. And so that's the job. I mean, I don't know. We'll find specific ways to do that, but those are the two things that liberal journalism in the United States needs to do right now, if you ask me.
Well, we wish you all the luck in carrying it out. It's been a terrific conversation to cap a terrific day. And Michael, good to see you.
Yeah, likewise.